most of the people moved here as Silicon Valley grew.
Bunch of Midwesterners.
Well, Midwesterners, Easterners, they came from all over for Silicon Valley, really.
Yeah, but you were just on the other side of the hill over there in Pescadero.
My hometown is Pescadero. That's where I lived till I was 10 years old. Then I moved all the way to Redwood City, over the hill, essentially.
But your town was so small, you were born in San Francisco, right?
Well, that's right. But my town was small then. But its main distinction, and I think, is it's the only town I know of in California that's smaller now than it was 60 years ago.
And you married a Las Gatas girl.
That's right.
I mean, you really are. This is your hometown.
Absolutely. This is where I grew up. In fact, now I live within about 3 miles of where I moved when I was 10 years old and where my parents lived till they died.
So give me
Didn't get very far.
No, at least geographically. What was it like back then? What was distinct about this place? I mean, it's all been buried now underneath asphalt and cement. What was special about this town?
Oh, it still had the very nice climate we have today, but then it was a bunch of small rural communities connected by a railroad that went down the peninsula and a couple of highways. But
and a jillion fruit trees.
Oh, yeah, it was fruit trees all over. In fact, my wife was on a fruit ranch that her grandparents owned in the middle of what is now San Jose. It was about the last island left there. It was finally condemned for a grammar school when there was no other property for them to take.
Well, then maybe you could tell me more than anybody. I got here after it had started, at the beginning of the 60s, but you saw it all the way back. Why here? Why did the entrepreneurial revolution happen here instead of anywhere else,
well,
or more than any place else?
You get a bunch of different stories on that. My view is it's because William Shockley, one of the inventors of the transistor, grew up in Palo Alto. And when he was setting up his company, he wanted to come back to where he grew up and established it in Palo Alto, actually. And
called you.
Well, he called me. I was his 18th employee. But I really measure the thing that has become Silicon Valley from Shockley Semiconductor in 1956. There were earlier technology companies, Hewlett-Packard and Varian in particular. But they were more like established companies on the East Coast. They were stable, growing nicely in one thing and another. Shockley introduced some instability into the system, and I think that was an important part.
He was the strange attractor that created the chaos?
Well, I think that may be a pretty good analogy, actually. Shockley was successful in attracting a bunch of us, but he also was a very complex person and very hard for many of the people to work for.
So you're being very polite when you said complex. I hear he was a tyrant.
I don't think a tyrant begins to encapsulate Shockley. He was a complex person.
Yeah.
He was very competitive, competed with the people that worked for him. My amateur diagnosis is he was also paranoid, and he considered anything happening to be specifically aimed at ruining Shockley somehow or other. The combination was kind of devastating.
Did he actually make you take lie detector tests?
He's tried to. For a very minor incident that happened in the laboratory, he decided he was going to make the entire staff take lie detector tests to find out who was guilty.
Sounds like Captain Queeg in the Caine Mutiny.
As a matter of fact, that book was popular about that time, and we saw the analogy, wondering if there were going to be 4 or 8 palm trees there the next morning.
So you left town. You left the state. What was that like? I mean, what did your parents do? What was your father's career?
My father was a law enforcement officer. He was the entire law enforcement on the coast side of San Mateo County when we lived in Pescadero.
Oh, really?
And then
was he a county sheriff, or was
he was a county sheriff then. Initially, he was elected as a constable, and he became part of the sheriff's office. We moved to Redwood City. He moved into the county seat, into the sheriff's office, and he was undersheriff, the highest non-elective office in the sheriff's department for many years.
So, what was that like having your dad be the cop?
Well, it just meant he'd run off at night, and if there was fights or anything, he had to run off and take care of them. I was young enough then; I didn't appreciate that there was any special risk associated with that. But really, there probably was.
So by the time you get to be a teenager, I mean, was that a little disconcerting having your dad be the #2 law enforcement officer in town? You didn't like get in trouble too much, did you?
Well, those were simpler times. We'll put it that way. I didn't get into much trouble, although if I had made the explosives today that I made in those days, I probably would have gotten into trouble. In my home chemistry laboratory, I used to turn out small production quantities of nitroglycerin, which I converted into dynamite, made some of the neatest firecrackers.
You're making dynamite in your house?
Oh, yeah. Actually, in my little lab off the garage. It wasn't in the house.
Was that lab still standing by the time you moved out of the house? Or
Absolutely,
did you blow it off
and I
its
still have
foundation?
all 10.
Yeah, that's a good start. That's how you knew you were going to be a chemist, right?
Well, yeah, I decided I was going to be a chemist before I set up the home laboratory, actually, and was able to have quite a bit of experience. Now, those were in the days when you could order almost any chemicals you wanted mail order. It was fantastic. The things you could buy then were really things you could have fun with.
Now, so obviously the chemist appears early on, the scientist. What about entrepreneur? Did you have any businesses that you started when you were young?
I was fired as a Saturday Evening Post salesman. That's about.
Oh, you were door-to-door magazine salesman?
Door-to-door magazines, yeah. And I didn't make it at that. I just found cold calling on houses to sell magazines was not something I was cut out to do.
Okay, so now you're back east here at Johns Hopkins. You're working in the lab. Now, I heard a story that you almost went into nuclear.
That story's not quite correct. I was wanting to leave the job I had there. I found myself calculating the cost per word in the articles we were publishing and wondering if the taxpayer was getting his money's worth at something like $5 a word. And I wasn't sure how many people were reading the articles anyhow. So I thought I ought to get closer to something more practical. And frankly, I wanted to get back to California. I enjoyed living in the East for a few years, but I really thought I liked it out here better. So I started looking around for jobs. One of the places I wanted to consider seriously was General Electric Company, which at that time had an outstanding research laboratory and was doing a lot of interesting things. And I interviewed there, and they were interested in getting people into their nuclear program at the time, and I wasn't especially interested in that. I also interviewed in California at the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory.
Right.
And there...
Now, that's the land of nukes there.
Yeah, they wanted me to essentially take spectra of nuclear explosions, as near as I could tell.
Oh, great.
Look at some of this is going on in the development of bombs, really. And I didn't find that very attractive, so I turned down their offer. But that turned out to be how I got in the semiconductor business. Bill Shockley got permission to go through their files of the people to whom they had made offers that had turned them down, and got my name. And he was just setting up his laboratory. And he needed
in Mountain View.
In Mountain View. He thought he needed a chemist because they'd been useful at Bell Laboratories, and gave me a call one evening. And that was the beginning of my exposure to Shockley and to silicon.
So you're at Shockley. Shockley becomes almost impossible to work for. At that point, you join the legendary traitorous eight.
Yeah, we decided that we'd be much better off if we could take advantage of Shockley's tremendous technical capability without being subjected to his management approaches. So a group of us actually went around Shockley to Arnold Beckman of Beckman Instruments, who was financing the operation, to try to do something where Shockley would be moved aside as the manager of the operation, but would operate as something like a consultant.
So it was a coup d'etat.
Well, it was, and I guess we kind of overestimated our power. We had a few meetings with Beckman that were moving in that direction, thinking of something like getting Shockley a professorship at Stanford and so forth. And we discovered that 8 young scientists had a difficult time pushing a new Nobel laureate aside in the company he founded. And Beckman, on the advice of someone that he got in contact with, decided that would wreck Shockley's career and essentially told us, look, Shockley's the boss. That's the way the world is. We felt we had burned our bridges so badly.
Well, one would imagine, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't forgive you for 30 years, did he?
Well, I'm not sure if he ever did, at least some of the people involved. But anyhow, we went around him and we figured that at that time we just had to leave. So the group of us liked working together and were wondering if there was a company that would hire the whole group. And one of the group, Gene Kleiner, wrote a letter to a friend of his father's that was at one of the investment banking firms in New York, and essentially said, there are a group of us that like working together. You think there's a company that would like to hire the whole group. And the investment banking firm sent out 2 people to talk to us, a senior partner and a relatively young Harvard MBA.
Art Rock.
Art Rock, yeah. It was now famous as the dean of venture capital.
And thus begins venture capital in Silicon
Venture
Valley.
capital really didn't exist in those days. Anyhow, they came out and they spent an evening talking with us and essentially said, you don't want to look for a company. What you want to do is set up your own company and we'll find financing. So we sort of said, okay, that way we won't have to move. We all had houses in Silicon Valley, which were much less expensive in those days.
But at that moment, you became entrepreneurs.
That's
and
right.
Did it register with you that, oh my God, we're going to actually start our own company and be our own bosses?
It didn't really that much.
You were thinking more about the mortgage.
Well, we were all sufficiently confident we could find another job someplace. I don't think anybody was very concerned about it, but I describe myself as an accidental entrepreneur. That's being the accident.
This is headquarters for Fairchild Semiconductor, a division of Fairchild Camera and Instrument Corporation.
I saw a little bit of Fairchild as a kid. It still strikes me as maybe the most extraordinary company I ever saw. It had enormous amounts of talent. It was incredibly volatile. I mean, looking back and trying to imagine all of you stuffed into that little company, 29 years old, it seems impossible. It's like you were actually doing nuclear energy. You just happened to do it in semiconductors instead of at General Electric. I mean, it looked like it should have exploded from the very first day.
Well, a lot of things happened. We got into the right part of the technology, the right direction, through the photolithographic printing of the circuits, the development of the integrated circuit, and so forth. And the opportunity that we exposed was quite a bit bigger than the company was capable of satisfying. So there were a lot of other approaches that were available, and our people saw those, and we were a young company, and they started running off, pursuing those opportunities, getting financing elsewhere. Venture capital was becoming professional at that time. The first venture capital partnerships existed, so people were able to get financing to carry on these ideas. And from Fairchild, literally dozens of companies were set up to pursue opportunities that were developed initially at Fairchild.
I actually saw a list once. It ended up being 150 companies came out of Fairchild. It started Silicon Valley.
It really did. And, that's my view of the way Silicon Valley got started. And it set this whole idea in motion that a few young engineers with some good ideas could take some money and go off and set up a new company. That was really the difference in Silicon Valley from other places. The Boston area had a lot of high technology companies, but they tend to operate in the classical vertically integrated mode. They never had this tremendous fractionation that existed out here. And Fairchild, after Shockley, was really the source of that explosion.
Now, what was that like at Fairchild when it got to the point that it was just bleeding people every day? I mean, literally every day someone was leaving the place to start a new company.
It got kind of frustrating when you were losing some of your best people. I had several incidences during that time period where people who were really my close friends as well as employees decided they were going to spin off and do something that was either directly competitive or closely competitive with what Fairchild was doing. And that was a nuisance. The turnover rates were very high in those days. We had relatively little to keep a lot of the technical people at Fairchild. It was before the days when stock options were very broadly spread around. Well, some of the people had options. They didn't extend to all the technical staff by any means.
So when did the bug get you?
The bug hit me in 1968. And again, for negative reasons. I'm not the positive entrepreneur. But Fairchild Camera and Instrument, by that time our parent company, they had acquired Fairchild Semiconductor Corporation, got rid of 2 chief executive officers in a 6-month period. And we're running the company with a 3-man committee of the board of directors.
Well, that's a kiss of death right there, yeah.
Well, they were looking on the outside for a new CEO. Bob Noyce was a logical internal candidate, and they were going to pass him over. And that kind of ticked him off. I realized that if they brought something from the outside, things were going to change quite a bit. I was getting frustrated with the difficulty of transferring new technology from the laboratory I was running into the production part of the organization. That when Bob said he was interested in leaving, I said, I'll go too.
Now, between you and Bob, I don't think you would have had much trouble getting funding.
No, that was ridiculously easy. First of all, 1968 was one of these peaks of venture capital availability. There was a lot of money around looking for deals. It was before the tax law change of '69, which really shut a lot of that down. Secondly, we'd been sufficiently successful at Fairchild. We were fairly well known. So we called Arthur Rock, who by that time was located in San Francisco and had set up venture capital partnerships, so he had none active at the time, and asked him if he had raised the money for us and we needed to get started. Arthur took the afternoon to call a few of his friends, and by evening had the $3 million that we wanted to begin with committed.
So by dinner time you were funded?
Essentially.
Now there's one more crucial step, and that is employee number 1. Your first hire, which is Andy Grove.
Yeah, actually, Andy turns out to be employee number 4.
Oh, really?
And we got him in, and then he hired Les Vidaz, and Les Vidaz got to be employee number 3. Andy says that characterizes the Hungarian who gets in the revolving door after you and gets out first. I didn't know what happened with 2 Hungarians.
So you have a half Hungarian company at this point.
Absolutely.
Interesting point that both of them have remained with the company ever since. There's not too many Silicon Valley companies that the first 4 people involved in the firm never leave the firm.
No, we were very lucky. We we recruited a good group starting the company, and they stayed with us a long
Well, it
time.
obviously worked. I mean, how does it feel to know that Intel is more valuable than the entire U.S. automobile industry? I mean, you are now the creator of one of the most successful firms ever, probably the most successful firm in the world right now. Did you have any sense that that was going to happen until it did happen?
Well, these things happen gradually. I think Bob Noyce and I would have been severely disappointed if Intel had been less successful than Fairchild had been. Once you've been through it once and achieved a degree of success, to back off much from that would be a problem. No one could have predicted, at least no one I know could have predicted, how important these products were going to become in the economy and how highly they were going to be valued.
But do you laugh at the irony that you are in many ways the most successful entrepreneur of all time, and it was all an accident? You didn't plan on any of this?
Well, you got to keep Bill Gates in there to keep calibrated.
Well, okay. Well, we'll see how he lasts. So we'll see where he's at when he's your age.
You know, and I'm not an entrepreneur to the point where that is the most important thing to me, to go out and do something new. I would be very reluctant to go out and just say I'm an entrepreneur. Now what am I going to do? I'm much more comfortable in a position where I see an opportunity and then pursue it. We saw an opportunity in setting up Fairchild to complete what Shockley's initial vision was, which we had abandoned, which was to make a silicon transistor. At Intel, we saw an opportunity to make very complex circuits and kind of change the leverage in the business.
I know you're very involved in conservation activities. In fact, you're leaving to go to New Guinea for a month. You're going to go out in the middle of the jungle out there.
I don't know what the technical opportunities are today. The internet seems
No,
to be...
your opportunities for you at this point in your life.
Oh, in my life?
What are you pursuing where you can make a difference?
You know, I've been fortunate in, frankly, making a lot of money in this business over the years. And my biggest challenge now is figuring out how to use that to have the most impact. It turns out I think it's harder to spend it, give it away, than it is to make it initially, if you want to do it carefully and be sure what you're doing makes sense.
Is conservation that way?
Conservation is one of the areas where I work in. I have a close association with one conservation organization, Conservation International, who I think does an outstanding job in their field. I find that attractive. You know, we try to make it so the few wild places left on this planet are more valuable to the people around them standing than they are cut down and converted to something else. Our goal is to preserve as much of the Earth's biodiversity as we possibly can. But that's one organization. It's not sufficient to take care of the total I have to invest in good opportunities. It's just awfully hard to find enough hours in a day to track down others that are equally valuable.
Now, you and Mrs. Moore have been married now for more than 50 years?
Not quite. 49 years.
49 years.
Last week.
Do you still go out rock collecting? I know for years you used to go out. You were real rock hounds.
We don't do so much of that. What we really used to spend our time doing together is fishing. Spend almost all our vacations off to Baja, California, or someplace, principally saltwater fishing.
So you're still a beach kid?
I'm still a beach kid, yeah. Unfortunately, my wife can't do that so much anymore. She's gotten to the point where her body is breaking down and doesn't go very easily to some of these remote areas.
If you were to run into your younger self, perhaps on his way back out to Mountain View to go work at Shockley Semiconductor, after all you've seen now in the last 50 years, what would you tell him? What advice would you give him?
Be in the right place at the right time.
Easy to say.
It is, and it's hard to do. It's something I was very fortunate in, I think. You know, I lucked out by being close to a few of the major inventions, really landmark changes in the electronics industry. And not everyone can have that, but there are sure a lot of opportunities out there.